in France, but my parents are Americans. And my father's from Colorado, my mom's from New York, Connecticut. My parents like to travel, and we moved back to Colorado when I was like 1960 or so. And I grew up in Denver, Durango, and then later in Montana. Probably like you, I've always been interested in unusual things, esoteric, UFOs, Atlantis, megaliths, Stonehenge, pyramids. I also have interests in cryptozoology, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and giant snakes and in Nikola Tesla and anti-gravity, super science, Philadelphia experiment, all that kind of stuff. And I love to travel. Megaliths and other unexplained things are really probably my big interest and what I'm most known for. But one of our best-selling books that we ever published, and I was the editor of, was a book called The Fantastic Inventions of Nikola Tesla. So I'm also very interested in Tesla, and I like a lot of retro stuff too. So the whole idea too, and I know Robert's going to give a great presentation later about how old civilization is, and that has always been a big question. For a long time they said that in Malta, and these ruins here at Malta and Giza, the oldest ruins in the world, going back around 7,000 BC or so. I mean, it's all controversial. This is a cave on Malta called the Dargalang Cave, where this giant tidal wave washed in all these pygmy elephants and pygmy rhinos and stuff on Malta. And it's like Malta at that time probably wasn't an island, this little island off Sicily. And in fact, what the Mediterranean was like at that time, quite different, a bunch of lakes and stuff like that. There's over 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean. And so now mainstream archaeologists are saying that Göbekli Tepe is now the oldest ruins in the world, going back to around 9,000, 10,000 BC. And that's getting towards the time of Atlantis. I want to point out too, like at Göbekli Tepe, what's kind of interesting, like these animals, foxes and lizards and other things like that are carved on relief on these megalithic T monuments at Göbekli Tepe. We're going to see some more of that here coming up a little bit later. Things about Göbekli Tepe, where it is, I'm going to not go into that too much. One of the more interesting ruins too, with giant megaliths, is at Baalbek in Lebanon. It has the largest cut stones in the world that we know of today. At the Trilithon. These stones are weighing over 1,000 tons. Just exactly how and why any ancient people would want to carve, move, construct with such gigantically huge blocks of stones is a complete mystery. Archaeologists can't really explain it, but they have to somehow. And this is probably with mainstream archaeology. Although in many cases they just try to ignore things that they can't explain. With Baalbek, here's how a French archaeologist, he said, okay, here's how you're going to move these 1,000-ton megalithic blocks that are the size of a railway car. Well, you build this giant cage around it, you have these little hourglass type notches in the top, and then you put these wedges in it, and you have all these pulleys and stuff like that. And then when you're all said and done, you're going to move this thing a couple of inches. And then you start all over again, and then now raising it on top of a platform. So it's really pretty clear that, in my mind, yeah, they had to have, this couldn't have been so difficult for them. It must have been actually easy for them to do these things without thousands of slaves and people dragging things, that they have anti-gravity and stuff like that. This is the Osirion, which is at Abydos in southern Egypt near Luxor. The Osirion is interesting because it's actually adjacent to a dynastic Egyptian temple called Abydos. The Osirion has all these unusual giant granite blocks. There's no hieroglyphs or anything like that written on them. And it has the curious notching and things like that we're going to see in these knobs, stuff like this. They're not just square blocks. They often have these notching, Z's and stuff like that in them. And that's a lot like this is what you see in South America. And there's a wall in Cusco, actually, here. And you get the jigsaw puzzles, the jigsaw fitting of blocks together, and more of these kind of polygonal cyclopean masonry fit together. And now this is a place which is very much like what you see at Cusco, but it's actually the Necromanticon in northwest Greece, up near the Albanian borders. It wasn't discovered until 1960. It's actually underground. But it also has all this jigsaw polygonal placing of these stones. And again, they're perfectly fit together. Can't really get a razor blade or a knife and stuff in them. This is the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo. And it too is built out of this polygonal, perfectly placed megalithic construction. And the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo too is probably much older than it's attributed to be. Only probably maybe 1,000 years old or something. It's probably many thousands. And that's part of the thing with this kind of construction, is that it's indestructible in many cases, although it has been destroyed in some cases where the Spanish dismantled it, like here at Sacsayhuaman. This is right above Cusco, and it's built largely out of limestone. Spanish and Incas fought a big battle here, but it's this kind of construction too, when you have big earthquakes that are coming through, and the wave of an earthquake is hitting a wall. The walls, because there's no mortar in it, the walls move and jumble. This is an aerial photo of Sacsayhuaman. So the stones are locked in together. And the opposite of this kind of construction would be brick construction, where you have uniform bricks, or say small blocks of stone, cinder blocks or something, but they're all even in rows. And so you're going to have a shearing effect when the earthquake hits it. The bricks or stones are not locked in together like you see here. So the stuff you see in around Sacsayhuaman is pretty interesting. This is also near Sacsayhuaman, where you have these upside down walls and staircases. It's almost like somebody's come in here with their plasma cutting tool or power tool or something, and they're just cutting away at this thing, and for no real reason. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. Mainstream archaeologists say, well, these were the Inca stonemasons. They just went over there to practice, their stone cutting skills and stuff like that. But they're making these, very sharp edges and clean corners and things like that. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to look at it when you're looking for power tools, these inside corners and things like that. I mean, these are the things you just can't do with a copper chisel or just bashing something out with a rock in your hand, which is basically how they say they did these things. Stone hammers, things like that with chisels. The Incas too, or whoever be prior to the Incas, they would cut tunnels and things like that through solid rock. There's all kinds of interesting stories too, which I go to in my book on Peru and Bolivia, about these secret tunnels, the lost treasure of the Incas being stored in this vast tunnel system underneath Sacsayhuaman and Cusco. So the mainstream archaeologists are saying, yeah, it's just a matter of getting enough guys hauling and just pulling on these giant blocks and kind of put them into place. And in fact, there's something to that, in the sense that there's a formula. If you just get 1,000 guys or whatever like that pulling on some giant stone, it will move. But the problem is, in a lot of those cases, and particularly in Peru, they can't find where all these people would stand, because these cities are on knife edges of ridges and stuff like that, Ollantaytambo or Machu Picchu. I mean, there's just not the place for thousands of people to be hauling and pulling up on roads. Machu Picchu is a megalithic city and a secret city that's high up in the Andes. It's also got perfect construction. This kind of knobs again, which we saw at the Osirion. Some really unusual buildings at Machu Picchu, huge lichen patches. To me, the most interesting place in Peru is Ollantaytambo, and you go to the Sun Temple, which is up on top of this knife ridge up here, and you can see how it is on the edge of cliffs and stuff. And this is one of the places where the stonemasons are trying to figure out, okay, how did they build this? Where did all the people stand? Hauling the blocks up, and they can't figure that out. So you know, even the experts who are the mainstream experts are talking about this. I mean, they admit it. You know, it's just like, well, we just can't explain it all. And that's the kind of thing. So at Ollantaytambo, you have some really, really amazing walls. Just what it's all for and why. Perfectly fit together. You get the knobs and stuff. Very large lichen patches here. You get up towards the top. This is what you see. Huge blocks of red granite. And then you have this kind of crummy fill and stuff here. As you look at it from the east side going west, this is also what you see. And this is exactly what Ollantaytambo looked like during the Spanish conquest. And in Inca times, this is what it looked like too. Because they couldn't move. The Spanish couldn't move any of these blocks. The Incas can't move them. The modern Peruvian government can't move them either. But they're doing things like this. I mean, you have these huge 50, 100, 200 ton blocks of granite, things like that. This one's notched right here, but then you have all this crummy fill that's in between it. And I mean, it's clear to somebody, you know, who's looking at megalithic construction that, well, whatever's going on here, these blocks are to be assembled or even have been assembled perfectly together with all the notching, these small little thin blocks coming in. Here's part of an Andean cross. This is an unusual wall. This is actually the main thing you see when you go to Ollantaytambo. You stand in front of this big wall, the 7 monoliths, as they call it. But yeah, the whole temple must have looked originally like this, but it's been completely destroyed. And so as you walk along, once again, you see how these giant blocks are here. But here's your Inca construction here, and over there, like this stuff. But yeah, whoever's building this isn't going to do this. So yeah, most of the structure is just completely missing, and it's been like in my mind it's been destroyed. Mainstream archaeologists often say, well, they never finished building this, and in fact, right up to the Spanish conquest of Peru, yeah, supposedly the Incas were still making this thing, right? But they couldn't have made this. And even today, what's so amazing as you look at it, it's just, a modern construction company in Peru couldn't do this. With all their cranes and everything they've got, they couldn't move and do these things. Now, one of the other things that you see, and this is Ollantaytambo, are what are called these keystone cuts. And these are these T-shaped cuts on these megalithic blocks. And this is Ollantaytambo. You also see this at the Sun Temple, the Coricancha in Cusco too. Now this is really indicative of this construction at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. And really these keystone cuts are the proof that the Incas didn't build any of these structures. And in fact, whoever built Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, those structures, those are the same builders of Ollantaytambo. Now, if you go around one side of Ollantaytambo, you'll also see a keystone cut on a wall. Here we'll go back to that real quick. And it's actually on a vertical wall like this, but this is the wrong place for it. A keystone cut can't be used here. A keystone cut has to be on a flat, level, vertical plane, yeah, because molten metal is poured into it. And there's always a corresponding keystone cut on the other side, and then these clamps or cramps are poured into it, and they're like a big double T shape on both sides. There's different ones too, some are hourglasses and things like that. We're now climbing up to the quarry where these things are. Ollantaytambo is really up here. You can even see part of the ramp that came up, which is on the other side of where we were. But this is where all these giant blocks are right up here. And it's the knife edge of a cliff. And that's why there's just not a place even today for more than 20 or 30 people to stand in this small little platform. So it's quite unusual. Most people don't get up to the quarry, which is on the far west side of the Urubamba River, going up this mountain. It takes a whole day riding horses or hiking up there. But eventually, as you get up towards the top, you find this huge scree slope from the mountain, huge blocks of granite, and some are quarried. So they were cut up high on the mountain. They were quarried into these giant rectangular blocks and stuff like that. And then they were hauled down, and then over this river, and then up here, and then up over there. So they actually had to like move these giant blocks down the mountain, across the river, and they can't figure out how they did that. And then up again these slopes. This is unusual too, because here they were starting to saw and cut this block, but they stopped at some point. You can see here the saw marks on different sides. It's like a giant blade, saw blade, which is coming down and starting to cut this like a loaf of bread or something like that. What you also see up there at the quarry is this giant stone wheel that's also been like sliced and it's perfectly smooth. It's like something from the Flintstones or something like that. And what's interesting is that the Incas were not supposed to know about the wheel. Okay. But yet, here's this giant megalithic stone wheel up there. And in fact, Pratzen, Jean-Pierre Pratzen, who's this Swiss-American guy at Berkeley, who's tried to study all this, and he's kind of mainstream in some ways, although he admits he just can't explain it all. And he suggested that somehow the Spanish had come up here and made this, and as a grinding wheel or something like that, because the Incas aren't supposed to know about wheels, you know. So it all gets so strange. When you go to the Curry Concha, you have also strange things there. This is the Sun Temple. There are niches that are also carved and drilled, very articulated. It's almost like some kind of machine or something like that was in there. Cables and things like that running into it. The whole idea that you can have power tools and things, you have to have electricity. These guys are going to have electricity, cables running into things, stuff like that. This is a place we're still South America, and we're moving south through the Andes to Lake Titicaca, and this is a place that's just east of Lake Titicaca called Cotimbo. As you go up high up to Cotimbo, you have these weird towers and buildings. Not that many tourists actually go to this site. But it's very unusual. It's similar to the Silustani site, which maybe some of you have been to. But here are these towers, which are also very mysterious, because they're not sure what they were used for. But they would also have, like the Göbekli Tepe, these animals, and lizards and snakes particularly, but other things too, pumas, lizards. They're carved in relief. Here, got a couple of pumas up here. There's another puma down there. There are lizards and things on some of them, and snakes. But it's the same kind of thing that's at Göbekli Tepe, actually, of these little foxes and animals that are carved in relief on the rocks. And since they're out, so you actually have to carve the whole rock around it. These are some snakes. Then this is also a building near Cusco. Now it's curious too, the Yezdis in northern Iraq. These are the people who, they're up around Mosul and stuff. Some people say it's like one of the oldest religion in the world. But on their temples too are these snakes carved in relief, like you see in Peru. So it's pretty interesting. And it's something for me traveling around the world is finding these similarities and how these worldwide cultures somehow fit in together and do much of the same thing. As you go farther south along the west shore of Lake Titicaca, you'll also come to this Devil's Door, the Door of Amaru Muru. It's this weird whole door, sometimes called a stargate and things. It's carved into the solid rock on this, which is a natural weird ridge coming out. And it's as if, too, other structures and walls were somehow fitted in with it. They're now long gone. And it's interesting, too. I mean, it's basically a false door. I mean, a door going nowhere. And you find that in Egypt, too. Like this one is in Giza. And it's just a door, like in Peru, just carved into rock for whatever, some religious ceremonial purposes. This is an unusual site, too, called Chamaicata, which is in eastern Bolivia. This is a remote site. It's on top of a mountain, kind of like Machu Picchu. It's all kind of carved into stone. There are these weird channels. Eric von Däniken, one of his early books, had been there, and I wouldn't have even known about the site without reading his books and stuff. So I've been there here a couple of times. He thought maybe this was some rocket launching pad, you know, and for launching rockets, which is probably not the case. But it is some weird site, and it does have tunnels and things like that too. With there was a Swiss Bolivian guy who had a house around here, and he was digging a well, and down around 50, 80 feet, he started finding all of these cut sandstone blocks that were like channels for like drainage or something like that. So, all right, yeah, here's Lake Titicaca, and which is very mysterious. I do write about it in my book. There's a lot of UFO activity here. Sunken cities, sunken ruins. They know there are sunken buildings in Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is quite an unusual lake. It has seahorses in it, which is hard for geologists. I'd pitch through what Robert has to say about that. Seahorses are an oceanic small animal. They usually live in shallow tropical seas, like around Indonesia and stuff like that. But there is one up in the Andes. James Churchward, who wrote the famous Lost Continent of Mu books and things like that, he surmised that South America had been depressed, and the Amazon was a big oceanic sea, and that this area here there was a canal going across, and that part of Lake Titicaca kind of ended up as part of this thing in a pole shift cataclysm that changed all the continents and stuff like that. The famous Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku, and it too is it's not something that was just standing by itself, and in fact this thing shouldn't be where it is probably. But with these notches and stuff here, this is really just a monolithic door that's part of some other gigantic structure that's just not there anymore. And at Tiwanaku too, there's all of these tunnels and sluices going through. They've only just really in the last 10, 15 years uncovered things like this. And so throughout and underneath Tiwanaku and in a sense Pumapunku, there's all these channels. And what really I maintain in my book that Tiwanaku was really like a metallurgical plant. They diverted a river, which they did at Chavin as well, and they're washing ores. They're bringing, it's a very tin, copper, gold, silver rich area where, and so they're getting the metals. This is the famous Kon-Tiki statue, made famous by Thor Heyerdahl. It's also in Tiwanaku at the Sunken Temple. And what he's doing here is he's in the famous tiki position. And the tiki position, he also has, by the way, a big beard and a mustache, which American Indians don't have really facial hair. But the tiki position is this, where you have one hand over your heart and another hand over your stomach. And that's the classic tiki position. And if you go to Tahiti and the Marquesas Islands, New Zealand, and places like that, you'll see all these images of tiki, greenstone medallions, and they're always in that position. So this is something you're finding in Polynesia and also in South America. At Tiwanaku as well, apparently there was this big pyramid with a reservoir at the top. They actually had to pump water uphill into this pyramid, and I think they probably used that reservoir as part of the washing of the ores and the whole metallurgical plant. So let's look at this map real quick. So yeah, Tiwanaku's right around in here, the southern part of the lake. This is Lake Popo down here, which is a salt lake. At some point, Lake Titicaca was also salt water with seahorses and stuff like that in it. But then that water drained into this lake here, and these are also these salt flats around here. But all this area, which is called the Altiplano, is very, very rich in metals and ores. This is really the tin lands and the gold and all that kind of stuff. Your Nazca areas, like all over here, and some of the giant conehead, Dosocephalus guys and stuff. We'll see them in a minute. We'll head over there. So here's a satellite photo of Lake Titicaca. The really deep parts are really over here. It's almost like 1,000 feet deep. This whole area is quite shallow. This is where they think some of these sunken cities are. Here's the Island of the Sun, where there are also sunken ruins and things in this area. And Tiwanaku's kind of right down around in there. The Reed ships and stuff on Lake Titicaca were famous that Thor Heyerdahl made. This was a Bolivian artist named Ramiro Gonzalez, and he also drew up these pictures which I liked of what he thought Tiwanaku and stuff looked like with the flood and all the water around it. He also thought of this pole shift idea and that South America was quite different in prehistory. So let's go back here now. Here's Pumapunku. These are these giants, in many cases sandstone, but a lot of it's granite too. Huge blocks of stone. Also, and here's the giant keystone cuts that you're going to see, and they have them in Tiwanaku too. Huge keystone cuts here. So you're going to pour these liquid metals into these slots, and there'll be a big metal clamp there. And you wouldn't think these giant blocks are really going anywhere. They weigh 100 tons, 200 tons, but they still want to put these metal clamps and stuff like that. Here's your H blocks, which you might have seen on the Ancient Alien show and stuff like that. These are granite, and they're so, finely articulated, and the way they are, I mean, it's very, very complicated what they've done with these stones. And so this is a difficult thing to do, and even with power tools to make these, and they are very sharp, it still would take quite a bit. And there's a certain uniformity about it. It's really like almost like some computer-aided design CAD program that's controlling some kind of cutting blades and stuff like that, and it's making these all these H blocks and other things. More than keystone cuts here at Pumapunku. So it's easy to associate the keystone cuts here with Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, but then they're also in the so-called Inca buildings and whatnot. And here we are filming with Ancient Aliens right there. More keystone cuts, more keystone cuts. Here's Christopher Dunn now measuring one of granite block at Pumapunku. You can see all these small drill holes, and there's a line cut across here too. That's just a shallow line, but it's been obviously cut by a saw. I mean, this is the kind of thing that only power tools can do. Which, and the whole idea, I mean, they had to set up whether they landed some kind of airship here or just hauled their whatever, some kind of factory to this place. So Chris is measuring it. He has all kinds of special measuring tools, even like how level, flat a block of stone is, that kind of thing. And so, when you see these things, and they're just so perfectly made and finely made, you can see again over here, these saw cuts here, and there are drill holes. I mean, it's just not something that a primitive, worker can do with stone tools and even metal drills and things like that. Typical trenching that they're doing at Pumapunku, where they have archaeological trenching, and then as they uncover all this mud and muck that's there, again, they find the keystone cuts, and in some cases the metal clamps are in there. This is kind of the east side of Pumapunku. Last time we were there, they weren't allowing people to go into this area for some reason. But you can see here how these megalithic cutstone blocks are sitting here on these pillars of mud and muck. It's like some giant tidal wave just hit this building, destroyed it, knocked all of the blocks around, buried it under all this mud and muck. And then as archaeologists start to dig it out, this is exactly what they find. A big block of stone sitting on a pillar of mud. Giant statues were found at Tiwanaku too, like this one, the Bennett monolith, gigantically huge. Other parts of Tiwanaku where these monolithic doors are being cut out. This I thought was a very unusual bit because it looked like some kind of cement that was actually being put into the blocks. This is also part of like what would be a doorway. This is the kind of thing that you kind of see around the Sphinx, but it's a very smooth circular surface that's coming down, and then to actually create that, plus these kind of where the circular smooth part is coming, where this angular part, where these meet, these are all kind of things that are just really impossible to do without power tools and things like that. This is a monolithic door. Here you can see how that there are sockets at the bottom where like metal pegs or even stone ones would sit in it. There's a tenon kind of a thing. I mean, the whole place is just very carefully planned, constructed. It's done in such a way that's mind-blowing. And whoever did it, and for whatever reason, and how they did it, I mean, they were just superior craftsmen and architects and stonemasons. Now, this is in Persepolis in Iran, and these are also monolithic doors, very much like at Tiwanaku. So, and their monolithic doors are very unusual because they're doorways carved out of just a solid piece of rock, where normally a doorway would be made out of 3 pieces of rock with a lintel across and stuff like that. So this is a especially unusual way of making a doorway. This is the kind of complicated articulation of one of these monolithic doorways. It's really something that that's just not really done by normal people and people who don't have power tools. And even today, with our power tools and whatnot, we just wouldn't construct like this. It's not practical, and even we don't have really what it takes to do that kind of thing. This is what these blocks look like with a clamp in them, and they're poured in as molten metal. And these are actually keystone cuts in Egypt. And they're at Karnak Temple in Luxor. And these are some keystone cuts at Edfu Temple near Aswan. And this is like what we were seeing at Ollantaytambo. This is a wall that shouldn't really be here. It's been reconstructed from older material. None of these keystone cuts are where they should be. A few of them, like this one, we're 2 blocks that were fitted together. But over here, these would be from some other thing. But once again, you would never put keystone cuts on a vertical block like that. It's just not what they're for. You can't use them that way. So whatever's going on with this wall, it was basically built by the dynastic Egyptians from other older material. They dismantled something else and then built this. And this is all thousands of years ago. But anyway, showing you that keystone cuts are, they're in Egypt, they're in Peru, they're in Vietnam. This is Mai Son, which is a megalithic city near Da Nang, right in this middle part of Vietnam, right around the demilitarized zone. It was actually, during the Vietnam War, it was just south of the demilitarized zone. It was in South Vietnam. This area was bombed and stuff. It's a megalithic city. It has the same kind of keystone cuts that we see at Pumapunku in Tiwanaku. And when we were there 5 or 6 years ago, and I pointed these out to our Vietnamese guide, these keystone cuts, and he'd never seen them before. I had to explain them to him. And yeah, he was just like, wow, I've never seen, I don't know about these things. I was like, yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. And, so yeah, and it's megalithic. Notice here the articulation on these blocks. Now, this city supposedly was built by the Cam people. And the Cam, their main headquarters was this island off of Vietnam called Cam. And in fact, it's where we get the name Cambodia today. Kampuchea, the Cam. The ancient Egyptian word for Egypt, too, was Cam and Kemet. So, in some ways, Cam is like an Egyptian word, only we're in Southeast Asia. These are what some of the Cam people and statues look like. They look they're sort of a cross between Buddhist, Hindu, and like Mayan and Olmec gods. Some of the Cam also appear to be African types. This is a Cam statue. He is Shiva. He's got his third eye right up here. So these guys were like Hindu, Buddhists. They were voyagers. They're the ones who built like Borobudur in Indonesia and stuff like that. This is a Cam statue too. It looks very, very Mayan and Olmec. And in fact, if you almost showed this to somebody in Mexico and told them it was a Mayan statue, they'd think, yeah, sure. More Cam statues. He looks a little bit like Kon-Tiki. He's got the beard and the mustache. He's got this meditation, rosary beads, flowy beads that he's using. Here's a female. And Angkor Wat in Cambodia is also much the same. Angkor Wat was a Hindu temple that was later recarved into Buddhist temples, and it has keystone cuts too. And it has the same clamps and stuff like that. It also has monolithic doors in it as well, Angkor Wat. So even modern megalith building or moving megaliths is something that people did. This is on Nias Island in Indonesia near Sumatra. These guys this is like 1910 or something. They're moving what was some other megalith and they're trying to move it somewhere else. And you kind of see that exciting picture. This is Bada Valley. This is in Sulawesi, a remote megalithic valley. It's only been since around the year 2000 that they built a road to this place. This is Sulawesi. It's north of Java. You have to get to a town over here and then you drive up into this valley. It's very, very remote even today. And the people there are Christians because the Muslims and other people never got to this remote valley. This is what it looks like. There's just this super terrible mud track that goes here. They think that this is some of the earliest rice paddies in the world are up here. And what you see at Bada Valley are very large megalithic granite statues like this. Also these jars that are cut. Archaeologists in Indonesia think they're from 4000 BC, but they don't know. They have no idea where, who made these, why. They have the tiki look. There's a similarity to these Sri Island statues. Very, very finely cut. Also, it looks like power tools using this. Very perfect sweeps, perfectly round eyes. It's like they've got their power tools and cutting tools that they're sweeping and they're making this thing. And the other thing that is seen around here besides these giant statues are these stone jars that are just found in the fields. They're made out of granite. They're also had to be made with power tools. What they were for, we don't know. Many of them are broken. The people don't use them today. They don't know what they were for. They don't know who built them. Here you see the edge of one that's broken. You can see, just to make these, a similar thing are these basalt jars that they found also at Saqqara, and you see some of them at the Cairo Museum where they've taken basalt. And it's this hollowing out of making the jar of it that's very, very difficult and in theory would require power tools. There's a place in Laos that's also like this called the Plain of Jars. And it has hundreds of these huge granite jars in this plain. And it's a remote part of Laos. And once again, they don't know how old they are, who built them, why, how, and whatnot. So let's go back briefly to Pumapunku. This is what certain architects thought it looked like as they put it together. Huge walls. Here's the H blocks as they would be fitted together. And here we go. This is what some archaeologists think like these walls might have looked like. They must have looked very, very modern by our standards today. Again, perfectly fitted. It's the kind of architecture that's just mind-blowing, really. And here's what Bolivian archaeologists have drawn as, this is how it all worked. Well, here are some of these H blocks and other kinds that are highly articulated. And now these primitive Indians in their little tunics, are going to pour the molten metal in there and make the clamps. But, people who were doing it were probably dressed really in some pretty far out and amazing clothing and stuff like that. So that's always the kind of thing when you go to museums. It's like a juxtaposition with people in loincloths and, rope sandals, but they're making all these amazing, things around them. This is a pyramid that's also near Tiwanaku. And there was the Potiki monolith was found around there. This is one of the artifacts that has Sumerian writing on it. Today, this is in the the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz. You can't see this. They brought it out for the Ancient Aliens show, and so I'm one of the few people who ever got to see it. It was weird, my camera failed at the time. I was getting pictures. This is some Sumerian writing that's on there. This is the Fuente Magnable, which is also at the museum. You can see this. They tell you not to photograph it, but who's going to not do that? So you get up there. There's two kinds of Sumerian writing on the Fuente Magnable. There's Sumerian cuneiform, which is this part over here, and then there's this proto-hieroglyphic writing too that Sumerians also used. The Sumerians and the Hittites had different forms of writing. They had both had hieroglyphic writing, and then they had other kinds of writing too. This is some of the hieroglyphic writing here. Now here's the thing with this too, that the Fuente Magnable is really like a time bomb, you know, in the archaeological field. This was the guy who found he found it near his house. And in fact, Maximiliano here, and he had it for years, and then this priest, it's all around 1960, and it shows you how long this is taken to surface. They traded him a house for the Fuente Magnable. And then the archaeologists began studying it. I mean, it is an official artifact in a Bolivian National Museum, but it can't be there. No mainstream archaeologist can acknowledge this thing. They can't. You'll never hear about it in National Geographic. It can't exist because it's got Sumerian writing on it. That makes it an impossible artifact. Sumerians couldn't have ever been to South America. They couldn't have been. There was never writing in South America. How about that? Okay, but this bowl is sitting there in the museum. Mainstream archaeologists, they cannot mention it. If they did, it would all be over. Everything, all the history books, every class on South American history, every museum in South America would have to redo everything they did. Because this proves that Sumerians, according to archaeologists, yeah, were there. Yeah, there's some Hittite hieroglyphs. Okay, here we go. So this is a guy at Tiwanaku. He's wearing a turban. He's got a chin plug there. These are other guys from Tiwanaku. This guy's got the beard and mustache. This guy down here looks very Oriental, Chinese kind of guy. These are some of the skulls that are there at Tiwanaku, and these are not on display anymore. I've found that since the Ancient Aliens show came on, and I go back to some of the museums I've been to, they've just removed some of the more unusual things that were on display. They've just taken them off because they didn't want people to come by and go, "Oh, what's that? Well, that's strange." They've just removed it. So you have these cone head guys with the elongated skulls at Tiwanaku. Definitely they were there. The really striking ones are really from this area around Paracas right here, and Nazca too, Ica. Nazca's farther south. So let's look at some of those really quick. These guys are tree pan and stuff at Nazca. All right, here's some really weird ones. You'll find these at the Regional Museum in Ica. These totally, utterly real. In fact, this photo, I was watching Jake Tapper on CNN one day this summer, and he showed this photo as a kind of like, as if it wasn't real or something. You know, he was sort of talking about reality shows and how TV was fake. And I jumped up, I was like, that's my photo. You know, and that's real, you know, that's a museum. And he goes, oh, yeah, you know, you can't believe what you see on TV, you know. Which I'll go along with that. But so anyway, these are some of the skulls. I mean, really unusual. I mean, some of these guys, their skulls are twice the size of a normal person. This guy too, Chongos. He's from the Chongos Pyramid. This is Chongos right here. They're still excavating it. It's right along the Paracas coast. That's what Chongos looks like. So a lot of these elongated skulls come from this area. Guys like this guy, I mean, they're some pretty weird looking guys. This is a very unusual skull because what happens is they know that why people did this, how it was done, whether it's natural. We know that modern people and ancient people can shape the skull. And it's a head binding thing. When you're still an infant, the plates in your head haven't fused yet. So as you grow older, you can shape the head, and then by the time you're around 6 or 7, yeah, if you're going to be some cone head, then your plates will start to fuse, and you still grow, but you see the plates. But this is unusual because it doesn't have the normal plates of a normal head. So if you're trying to find like an alien skull, this really would be maybe what you're looking at, and this really may well be the skull of some alien. Some infants do like that, and that's the big question. Were the humans who were doing this, were they trying to imitate these extraterrestrials? Were they imitating this other kind of weird elite Anunnaki who all look like this? This is the big mystery. This is a gold plate. This guy's been tree panned, his big hole cut in his head and a gold plate put in, and he survived it, and his bone grew around the gold plate. Red-haired people. A lot of the mummies and stuff in South America have red hair. This is also around Paracas. This is what they call the candlestick of the Andes, and it's something that's seen from the sea. So if you were a seafarer coming in, you would see this easily, and by air as well. And in some ways, it's pointing into the Andes and kind of southeast towards Nazca, maybe towards Tiwanaku. It doesn't have to actually be pointing towards anything. This is your Nazca. All these figures that are etched into the desert. They're really only well seen from the air. These things that look like runways and trapezoids. Some of these lines run all like through the Andes and things like that. The Olmecs also had elongated skulls. This is what Olmec guys look like. They also looked similar to guys at the Andes. They also look kind of like extraterrestrials and stuff. The thing is that the Olmec areas, which is around Tabasco and in Mexico, it's a very jungle area, and so skeletal material is not well preserved there. You don't have that many skeletons. This guy, this is in a museum in Merida. He's a pumpkin head, where his head's been like smashed in, and he's been tree panned too. And this is how you would do this whole head binding thing. A lot of you might be familiar with the whole Chinese thing of foot binding, where they were binding the women's feet up and whatnot, stuff like that. All the kind of this deformation of the body and stuff like that. The Olmecs themselves really weren't discovered by archaeologists until 1940. And they had a big, right just prior to World War II, they had this big archaeological meeting in Mexico City where they brought archaeologists from all over the world to tell them, hey, we found this new culture called the Olmecs. And they're these giant 20-ton basalt heads like this. The Olmecs, though, then there's about 20 of those, what they call the colossal heads. But the Olmecs they found expanded down into Guatemala and El Salvador, even to Nicaragua and stuff like that. There's so many Olmec statues and different things. The Olmecs were on both sides of Mexico. They were on the Atlantic side and on the Pacific side. And in fact, there's some indication that the Olmecs originally came from the Pacific. But that's called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is this narrowest part of Mexico. And that's also, in that area is where Monte Alban and the Oaxaca area, it's an easy way to cross from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. At La Venta, which they believe was the Olmec capital, it also was a well-planned out city with lots of good irrigation and stuff like that. So here we go, here's the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So this is really your main core Olmec area, right in this narrow area. The Olmecs were all up here on the Pacific coast. In Guatemala, the Olmec areas are all down here. La Venta and whatnot was here on the Atlantic. So this would have been a very good trade spot. And in fact, prior to the Panama Canal, this was probably the Latin America's main sort of cross right there. Nicaragua was another area for that. And in fact, before they built the Panama Canal, they also thought of building one there. What the Mexicans did was build a railway instead. And Nicaragua was another side. This is also an Olmec statue. Notice here, he looks very Egyptian. He's wearing a false beard, as Egyptians and stuff would do. He's got a kind of pharaonic headdress. It was the Olmecs who were the rubber people. They played the ball game, and that ball game was played as far north as Utah. So this is another interesting statue too. This is one of the Olmec colossal heads. And archaeologists thought this was a strange one because it's been dished out. It's like somebody took some power tool grinder and just made these little dishing marks in it. In the thing, they were like defacing it with their power tool. Just like, oh yeah, nobody needs this statue anymore. They can't figure it out. And mainstream archaeologists are baffled by this, like how and why they would have done that. It's clearly not part of the original cutting and carving of this giant head. At the Levanta Olmec Park 2 in Villahermosa, you see this on the back of a stele where somebody's also taken their power tool and made these little dishing circular marks in it, which would have seemed to be some drill power tool they're doing. At Comacalco, which is also nearby, and it's the Olmec city, and then was taken over by the Mayans, they had this. And they've removed this now, because I was just there. Yeah, this was there as a display at Comacalco. And just to show you all the different weird statues and ceramics and stuff they found, all these guys with their heads, what they look like here, this weirdo. Also this guy here looked very, very Chinese. This also very, very Chinese. I mean, these guys are like from all over the world. They're Africans, they're Chinese, they're Phoenician Mediterraneans with beards and mustaches and stuff like that. They've removed this. This was apparently the museum just thought this was too much. Too many ancient alien people came in and wanted to look at this and talk about it. This is in the Olmec, what they call it, Offering 3 from Levanta. These are jade figurines, and a Chinese scholar came around the year 2000. On the back of some of these are called celts up here, and they're jade. And you can see too what these guys look like, kind of orientalized, big heads and stuff like that. And this Chinese scholar said that what was the writing on the back of one of these celts was very ancient Chinese hieroglyphs, like the very earliest Chinese writing. And that only appeared in U.S. News and World Report. Like all the other magazines and newspapers didn't report it. You can find it online. So other people, let's go to the Egyptians. This is actually Meritaten, one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And she's also got the elongated skull too. Tutankhamun, he was also a cone head. And even though you hear all these stories and he appears in the news all the time, they never mention that he's got this elongated skull. He does. He's one too. This is a statue from his own tomb. These are his own artifacts of him. And yeah, so he has this elongated head. Akhenaten and Nefertiti of the Othnis, they all had this. And here's some of the Sumerian Ubaid figures. These are supposedly your Anunnaki guides right here. And totally authentic Sumerian things. This is what these guys would have really looked like. Very much like the Olmecs and what the guys are in South America and stuff like that. As I was researching this book on the enigma of cranial deformation with Brian Forster, I came up with, because it's a worldwide thing. And so there you have these Taoist immortal guys in China. And yeah, he's the biggest cone head of them all, this guy. And you'll find too that these other Chinese guys, this is what they call also the pumpkin head guys who have the cleft. And some of the Olmec figures have this weird cleft at the top of the skull. Very strange. You see that, these Chinese guys. Chinook Indians up around Seattle and Vancouver and stuff. They also did the cranial deformation. It was done in the Congo areas in Africa. This is taken around 1920. Cranial deformation was being done really right up until about 1960, and in Vanuatu, maybe it's even still happening today, which is remote Pacific Island. All right, well, I'm going to wind up real quick here. Take a few questions. I became really interested in these giant stone balls. They're in Enigma 2. These are in Costa Rica. They're many of them perfectly round granite stone balls. They don't know what they were used for. They're mainly found down near the Panama coast, down this area, this southwest area of Costa Rica. Archaeologists, mainstream archaeologists, again, are baffled by this. All archaeologists are really. We don't know, why they were doing that. Oh, the mainstream, anything they can't really explain. Well, it's some ceremonial object, and the shamans, the priests, they did something. Smaller balls were sometimes buried with chiefs and things like that. But what they would use these for, why? It's a famous, I guess, as Indiana Jones would say, yeah, they plugged temples with them, and then if you raided, the ball would roll down and kill you or something. But a guy sent me this some years ago. This was in 1910. They were building the Santa Monica Railway from Santa Monica going east through LA. What they had to do was, because it was electric trolley, it could only go up a certain level of a grade. So they had to take out some hills and stuff around Santa Monica to keep it level. And what they found there is they took out this hill. They found all these stone balls. No. And at the time they called them dinosaur eggs. They said, yeah, found some dinosaur eggs. Yeah. So even these weird stone balls are in Franz Josef Land, up in near Spitsbergen and stuff like that. And yeah, now what these are, they're granite balls like this. I mean, how they would get there. I mean, now here's what archaeologists and geologists are going to say now. They're saying, well, these are natural, but they can't really explain exactly. They kind of want to say that, well, there are these volcanic bombs and these volcanoes erupt. And there's a place in Mexico that's like that, where, this is in Bosnia actually. So when we went to Bosnia, and, that was one of the more interesting things we saw there, was they took us, hours away from Visoko, where the pyramid is, the so-called pyramid. But they took us to this place where there were these stone balls in this creek, and they were kind of interesting. They were baffling. This is a place in Mexico, Piedras. This also has these stone balls. The explanation for this is that this volcano was spewing them out, and that may well be the explanation for these ones at least. These are what some of them look like. And even there in Italy, these stone balls, this place, and they're big. The idea, I don't know, if catapults or something like that, smaller stone balls like these ones at Dubrovnik in Croatia, they may have well been, for cannons or catapults or something. But I became really fascinated by the whole idea of these stone balls and stuff everywhere, and I still have no idea what they're going to do with these. These are in Gongxi in Hunan, China. It's this little town. It's got these stone balls. It's like a little tourist area. People go and take pictures of them, of course. Malta, just back in Malta. Malta has all these stone balls. These smaller ones, too, might have been used somehow for moving some of the megaliths. We don't really know. This is in Malta. And on Easter Island, you're going to have that. On Easter Island, they say the most sacred thing there is this one stone ball on the north side of the island. And there's this little thing, there's a stone ball. And Easter Islanders tell you, yeah, this is, on the whole island, this is the most important thing, this ball. And you go there and you take a picture of it. And then you go to the statues. And I'll wind up here just with a couple of interesting statues, pictures of Easter Island, stuff like that. I know I'm running out of time now, but this is one of the things you got to realize about Easter Island and the statues, the ones at the quarry, is that they're buried. They're buried up to their chins. These things are huge. You go up, there's a crater lake that also has the Tortora reeds and stuff. I know I'm out of time. These are what some of these statues look like. This is how big they are, and they're just gigantically huge. And this, here we go. This is actually a Thor Heyerdahl thing, but this is what a lot of people don't realize. I mean, these statues are buried in 30, 40 feet of soil. And archaeologists don't explain that either. I mean, why? How does 30 feet of soil build up around a statue in 300 years? With people living around it. I mean, it's like these statues have been here for thousands and thousands of years. And I mean, that much soil has built up around them, during that time. I mean, so once again, it's the same thing in South America. I mean, they're saying, oh, the Incas just built this just 100 years before the Spanish got here. But then they, something happened and they just left all these giant blocks lying around. They just didn't have time to put them all together. And it's the same thing kind of Easter Island, where they just can't they're like, oh yeah, you know, these islanders got lost here, didn't have anything else to do, so then they started building some statues, and then, you know, then the Europeans showed up, and well, they didn't have to do that anymore. Well, yeah, it doesn't really make sense. So, you know, like Robert and others, you know, and Eric von Däniken, that was something I always liked about Eric's book, was that his thing was battling the experts. And, you know, well, the experts say this, you know, they're the experts. I'm just, you know, a goofy tourist, but I can't figure out what the experts are saying, you know, it doesn't make sense. So, I know I've already gone over my time. What are we going to do now, Mike? We can take a few questions. Thank you. Where's Mike? Is he still here? Or he went out? He went back to bed, probably. He had to get up so early to get us all ready. But I know if we call the schedule, I'm sort of supposed to stop. We're going to have a break, and then Micah, you're on, right? Right at 11, isn't it? Where's Micah? 11, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Mike, yeah, I'm just finishing up. We're going to take a little 15-minute break or something, and then Mike will go on, right? Okay. Is there coffee?
5-10 minutes for questions or anything?
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy to take any questions. Hey, look, I'm going to be with you guys for several days, having dinner with you and everything, and answer me questions there. Does anybody have any questions or comments they wanted to make right now? No? Yeah.
Did you say that the reason you think that they found the baby's head is because some kind of alien form was there, that you said that the skeleton of a real alien, they found their heads to emulate the...
Right, okay, yeah. What we can pretty much surmise here is that the people who had the extended craniums were this elite. They were the aristocrats. They were the bosses. They were the elite, the ones who had the cranial deformation. So, so the question is, okay, these guys are the elite. They have the cone heads and whatnot. But why do they have that? Yeah, why do they do it? So you'd have two main theories, I guess. One would be that they actually just look like that. I mean, this is what they look like. Just, you know, they were born this way. As they grew up, they would have these elongated heads. That's how they looked. But then the other theory, and the second theory has to be true in some ways, is that, okay, some people look like this with the elongated skulls. So now the normal humans who had normal skulls like we do, they wanted to look like that too. So they then created the head binding. And they were binding the head of these infants, and we know that was done. There's no question about that. And so, yeah, we're gonna, my kids are gonna grow up to be cone heads, you know, and like those other guys over there. And so, yeah, we're going to do this thing. We're going to bind the heads of our kids and your kids. And, you know, Grandma says we have to do that, you know, whatever. But it's why they're doing that. And the other question is, did some people naturally look like this? Like the Anunnaki, okay? Yeah, the Anunnaki looked like that, and they were the elite. And so the human elite also wanted to look like this too. That is... Well, I mean, that's certainly one idea. Yeah. The Anunnaki are real, and they look like that. Now, whether they're from another planet, as you know, that would be the question. And certainly, that's a good theory. There's nothing wrong with that. Mainstream archaeologists are not going to go for that, of course. And Sumerian archaeologists and scholars, experts, you know, they're going to say, yeah, these Anunnaki guys, yeah, they were the Anunnaki. Yeah, I mean, some of them had these elongated skulls. I mean, we know that. But they're humans, and they did this, rather than they're from another planet. I mean, we don't know. We can theorize. Yeah.
So for the humans, if they found the skulls of the babies, what would that do to their brain? Did it give them a bigger brain?
Well, right, and that's another good question. In my mind, it would. and it would maybe double the size of their brain. They would maybe have a bigger psychic powers were enhanced, that kind of thing. Their third eye was more powerful, whatever. Yeah, and that would be certainly, in my mind, that's a pretty good explanation. That yeah, their brain power and their brains are bigger. Yeah. Yeah.
How do they explain the differentiation between suture between human and non-human?
That's a hard one. And so that one skull that I showed you is anomalous. Yeah, that's
So
very.
there's others that don't
Some of the
have
other ones,
two
well,
parietas.
yeah, some of the other ones they do have more of the.
They don't have the two parietas, they have one.
They have one or yeah, and three or whatever. Here's what I would say, and what I found out doing that book, the cranial deformation book, was that this is a subject that mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists ignore. This is a subject they don't ever want to get into. And so they don't talk about it. And there are not books about it. When Brian and I did our book, I found out, to my surprise, it was the only book on the subject. There just wasn't. And the main reason why this is, and I talk about it in my Olmec book too, because the Olmecs are a big thing with Olmec. These guys too, by the way, are cone heads. The Easter Island statues. They also apparently have elongated heads, or it would seem. But the thing is that the main paradigm within archaeology is isolationism versus diffusionism. And we see that so much in North America and South America, and you see it also in New Zealand and Australia. And that is that ancient civilizations are isolated from each other. They're not really in contact. And so the idea that they build pyramids in Mexico and South America, and they build pyramids in China and Egypt, well, there's no connection there. That's just individual people here and there just doing their own thing, completely without any connection, and they just independently decided they would build pyramids. This is the same thing. This is all over the world. So archaeologists, this is a problem for them, because they want to say, oh, Easter Island is also a focal point for this too. Yeah, people in Easter Island, well, they wouldn't have gone to South America. There can't be some connection there, okay? They're only connected to Pacific Islands, all right? But now you have Egypt, so in other words, this is the same thing with pyramids. You're going to say, oh, are these pyramids like the pyramids in Egypt? Oh, no. No, they're not. There's no connection. So now you're going to do the same thing with the cone heads. Oh, are these cone heads over here like the cone heads in Egypt or there? Oh, no, they don't have any connection. Okay, this is what they maintain. And this is go to the University of Florida, of any university in the United States, university around the world. Utah might be a little different, but yeah, these guys are all saying, yeah, there's no connection between any of these guys. But that's a problem why they don't want to talk about the cranial deformation, because it is so unusual that it's hard to imagine that somebody in this remote island, or somebody in Mexico, or these guys in South America, or these guys in Egypt, or these guys in China, it's in Korea too, by the way, that they're all doing this independently without any connection with each other. And that is the big problem. And it's hard for them to deny that. So rather, they just don't discuss it. So there is no real discussion of it. And so that would be it. Thanks again. A cave on Malta called the Dargalong Cave, where this giant tidal wave washed in all these pygmy elephants and pygmy rhinos and stuff on Malta. And it's like Malta at that time probably wasn't an island, this little island off Sicily. And in fact, what the Mediterranean was like at that time, quite different, a bunch of lakes and stuff like that. There's over 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean. And so now mainstream archaeologists are saying that Göbekli Tepe is now the oldest ruins in the world, going back to around 9,000, 10,000 BC. And that's getting towards the time of Atlantis. I want to point out too, like at Göbekli Tepe, what's kind of interesting, like these animals, foxes and lizards and other things like that are carved on relief on these megalithic T monuments at Göbekli Tepe. We're going to see some more of that here coming up a little bit later. Things about Göbekli Tepe, where it is, I'm going to not go into that too much. One of the more interesting ruins too, with giant megaliths, is at Baalbek in Lebanon. It has the largest cut stones in the world that we know of today. At the Trilithon, these stones are weighing over 1,000 tons. Just exactly how and why any ancient people would want to carve, move, construct with such gigantically huge blocks of stones is a complete mystery. Archaeologists can't really explain it, but they have to somehow. And this is probably with mainstream archaeology. Although in many cases they just try to ignore things that they can't explain. With Baalbek, here's how a French archaeologist, he said, okay, here's how you're going to move these 1,000-ton megalithic blocks. These upside down walls and staircases. It's almost like somebody's come in here with their plasma cutting tool or power tool or something, and they're just cutting away at this thing, and for no real reason. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. Mainstream archaeologists say, well, these were the Inca stonemasons. They just went over there to practice, their stone cutting skills and stuff like that. But they're making these, very sharp edges and clean corners and things like that. And it's the kind of thing that you're going to look at if you're looking for power tools, these inside corners and things like that. I mean, these are the things that you just can't do with a copper chisel or just bashing something out with a rock in your hand, which is basically how they say they did these things. Stone hammers, things like that with chisels. The Incas too, or whoever be prior to the Incas, they would cut tunnels and things like that through solid rock. There's all kinds of interesting stories too, which I go to in my book on Peru and Bolivia about these secret tunnels, the lost treasure of the Incas being stored in this vast tunnel system underneath Sacsayhuaman and Cusco. So the mainstream archaeologists are saying, yeah, it's just a matter of getting enough guys hauling and just pulling on these giant blocks and kind of put them into place. And in fact, there's something to that in the sense that there's a formula. If you just get 1,000 guys or whatever like that pulling on some giant stone, it will move. But the problem is I was born in France, but my parents are Americans, and my father's from Colorado, my mom's from New York, Connecticut. My parents like to travel, and we moved back to Colorado when I was like 1960 or so. And I grew up in Denver and Durango, and then later in Montana. Probably like you, I've always been interested in unusual things, esoteric, UFOs, Atlantis, megaliths, Stonehenge, pyramids. I also have interests in cryptozoology, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and giant snakes and in Nikola Tesla and anti-gravity, super science, Philadelphia experiment, all that kind of stuff. And I love to travel. Megaliths and other unexplained things are really probably my big interest and what I'm most known for. But one of our best-selling books that we ever published, and I was the editor of, was a book called The Fantastic Inventions of Nikola Tesla. So I'm also very interested in Tesla, and I like a lot of retro stuff too. So the whole idea too, and I know Robert's going to give a great presentation later about how old civilization is, and that has always been a big question. For a long time they said that Malta, and these ruins here at Malta and Giza, the oldest ruins in the world, going back around 7,000 BC or so. I mean, it's all controversial. This is a box that are the size of a railway car. Well, you build this giant cage around it. You have these little hourglass type notches in the top, and then you put these wedges in it, and you have all these pulleys and stuff like that. And then when you're all said and done, you're going to move this thing a couple of inches. And then you start all over again, and then now raising it on top of a platform. So it's really pretty clear that, in my mind, yeah, they had to have, this couldn't have been so difficult for them. It must have been actually easy for them to do these things without thousands of slaves and people dragging things, that they have anti-gravity and stuff like that. This is the Osirion, which is at Abydos in southern Egypt near Luxor. The Osirion is interesting because it's actually adjacent to a dynastic Egyptian temple called Abydos. The Osirion has all these unusual giant granite blocks, and there's no hieroglyphs or anything like that written on them. And it has the curious notching and things like that we're going to see in these knobs, stuff like this. They're not just square blocks. They often have these notching, Z's and stuff like that in them. And that's a lot like what you see in South America. And this is a wall in Cusco, actually, here. And you get the jigsaw puzzles, the jigsaw fitting of blocks together, and more of these kind of polygonal, cyclopean masonry fit together. And now this is a place which is very much like what you see at Cusco, but it's actually the Necromanticon in northwest Greece, up near the Albanian borders. It wasn't discovered until 1960. It's actually underground. But it also has all this jigsaw polygonal placing of these stones. And again, they're perfectly fit together. Can't really get a razor blade or a knife and stuff in them. This is the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo. And it too is built out of this polygonal, perfectly placed megalithic construction. And the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo too is probably much older than it's attributed to be. Only probably maybe 1,000 years old or something. It's probably many thousands. And that's part of the thing with this kind of construction, is that it's indestructible in many cases, although it has been destroyed in some cases where the Spanish dismantled it, like here at Sacsayhuaman, because it's right above Cusco, and it's built largely out of limestone. Spanish and Incas fought a big battle here, but it's this kind of construction too, when you have big earthquakes that are coming through, and the wave of an earthquake is hitting a wall. The walls, because there's no mortar in it, the walls move and jumble. This is an aerial photo of Sacsayhuaman. So the stones are locked in together. And the opposite of this kind of construction would be brick construction, where you have uniform bricks, or say small blocks of stone, cinder blocks or something, but they're all even in rows. And so you can have a shearing effect when the earthquake hits it. The bricks or stones are not locked in together like you see here. So the stuff you see in around Sacsayhuaman is pretty interesting. This is also near Sacsayhuaman, where you have